Hey everybody, welcome back to Turn Bark Time. I'm the Turn.
I'm the Bark.
And we have been here a long time because this is season 5, episode tres. For all y'all playing at home, that's 3. You can say a nice little deux, trois if we're speaking of French. Eins, zwei, drei. If we're speaking to German. I don't know. I'm tired. We just talked about how we never stay up this late, except for when we get to talk to each other. So we are just kind of having a great time. Bark, really fun topic. I'm going to take the prelude on this one because it was interesting. So for those of you who know me or Barker students who probably watch this more than anybody else, and my mother, who also has been watching and commenting on each episode. So shout out Patty Turner. I love to play fantasy football. It's one of my all-time favorite things. I currently have 5 fantasy football teams and 2 pick'em leagues that I'm playing in right now. So one of the things I obviously do, since this is so interesting to me, because I love just the statistical probability of things happening. I also like yelling at the TV and having every football game matter in some way, shape, or form. So I listen to podcasts along with ours for fantasy football. So this is a shout out to the ESPN podcast for Fantasy Focus. They will not listen to this. I know they won't. I always tweet at them for answers to questions, and they never answer me, but that's okay. I've accepted it. But Mike Clay, who is an ESPN analyst, and he's actually the person, so if you play fantasy football, he is the person who creates the projections for ESPN Fantasy. And then he develops the first series of rankings, and then the other contributors then go in and that's where they shuffle their rankings up or down and then they give a consensus. And so he was wearing a shirt last week. I think it must have been on Wednesday because that's when we talked about it last time. And he was wearing a shirt for the Pottsville Maroons. So, and then he just started to talk about a story about a stolen championship. And of course, me being a history teacher and loving football, my ears perked right up. Now, side note, because I'm really proud of this, I got to see another team that's named the Maroons play. If you look at my hat, it says NSW Blues. That stands for the New South Wales Blues, which is a rugby league team, all-star team that plays, obviously, they represent New South Wales. And I got to go to a game in Australia this year, and it was absolutely incredible. But they also played the Queensland Maroons. And so I got to thinking about this, and I was like, I'm going to wear this hat. It means nothing to the story we're about to tell, other than the fact that they play a team called the Maroons. So this is the story of how the Pottsville Maroons had their championship stolen in the year of 1925.
Yes. So if you're not familiar with Pottsville, Pennsylvania, which you're probably not, because Pottsville is relatively the same size as either East Wenatchee, for those of you on the east side of the state, or slightly smaller than the town of Washougal if you're from southwestern Washington. So somewhere between East Wenatchee and the Dougal.
The Dougal.
The Shug. They prefer the Shug, actually.
No, we don't like Ohio State, so we're just going to call it the Dougal.
But Pottsville, it was largely a coal mining town. Still is a coal mining town. That's why it hasn't grown super big. But the Maroons are called the Maroons because they started as the Pottsville 11 when they started playing in 1920. They played an independent schedule, and then in 1924, I love this too because it's coal. They played in the Anthracite League.
Yes.
And the only reason I know what anthracite is, or as a color, is because Wazoo has adopted it as the other gray in the Wazoo, and I love it. It's in the Wazoo rainbow.
Hey, go Cougs.
And if that doesn't make any sense to you, whenever I talk about coaching football at R-Long, I say you can wear any color that's in the R-Long rainbow, which is red, white, black, or gray. As long as it's a school color, we can wear it. And Wazoo has added anthracite, which is a hard coal or a black coal. And they played a bunch of other mining teams. And then from 25 to 29, they were in professional football. The Pottsville Maroons played in the NFL, which apparently at that time you only could send in like $100 And
yeah, playing the NFL.
You were an NFL football team. And this is the leather helmet days. The forward pass has been invented.
Yeah.
They're called the Maroons because the owner, the guy who financed it, literally went to the sporting goods store and said, I need 25 uniforms. I really don't care what color. And the guy just said, okay, they're maroon. And so they became
Pottsville
Maroons.
Now,
That
Marcus,
that is the reason.
I'm going to tee for time you just really, really quick. And do you know what Pottsville is famous for?
The Maroons. I don't know. What else?
Pottsville is home to the United States' oldest continually operating brewery. It is home to the Yuengling Brewing, which is, again, it'd be the America's oldest beer. Now, what's cool about it, I have been to Pottsville, Pennsylvania, and I did not know about the Maroons at this time, but I took a tour of the Yuengling Brewery, and it was fascinating from a history teacher's perspective because instead of shutting down like most breweries did during Prohibition, they found other things they could sell to then allow themselves to continue. One being root beer and two being birch beer. If you've never had birch beer, you need to find a way to try it. I don't know where you can find it. Zero in Washington, but you should try it. Just, I wanted to throw that out there because I think it's interesting. So,
interesting. During this time period of the NFL, again, it's the barnstorming era. If you want an idea of what it looked like, this is not a historical depiction at all, but they made the movie in 2008 called Leatherheads with Krasinski and Clooney.
Right? Isn't it Clooney?
George, huh?
George Clooney's in it, isn't he?
Yeah, George Clooney. And then it's, what is it? Jim Krasinski? Is that it? What is it? John Krasinski.
John
Krasinski plays on
The Jim.
Office.
Yeah.
And then Renee Zellweger's in there too. She's the love interest in the triangle there.
Oh,
but they're not the Dayton Triangles. They're the Duluth Bulldogs, but which are really potentially the Duluth Eskimos. But anyway, this is a time of great fluctuation in the NFL, also because like things aren't very financially like solid. In 1925, there were 20 teams in the NFL, only 4 of which I went through, only 4 of which still exist, which would be the Cardinals, the Giants, the Packers, and where'd they go? There's one more. I can't think of who it is. Oh, the Bears.
Bears.
The Chicago Bears. So anyways, during this time period, there was no Super Bowl. There was no championship game. There was no tournament. No bowl championship series. Yeah, so for those of you who saw the red and yellow color scheme and saw a stolen championship and thought this is about the Florida State not getting selected for the college football playoff. Sorry. That's a different podcast somewhere else. But what happened was, so you had 8 games that they were supposed to play by the league schedule, and then teams were allowed to play as many games as they wanted to try and make as much money as possible. Which seems kind of weird because you have teams that, looking at it, in 1925, the Duluth Kellys only played 3 games. They went 0-3, but only played 3 games. And then you have teams like the Chicago Cardinals who ended up playing, let me do math, 14 games. Right? Oh, the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets played 20. I think that takes the cake for number of contests based on what I saw. And the Yellow Jackets will be important.
Yes, they will be.
They're important. Now, Pottsville plays their schedule, and they beat on, what was it, December 6th, they beat the Chicago Cardinals 21-7 and have the best winning percentage and best record in football and should be crowned at the end of the season the NFL champions. However,
a big however.
In an effort to make more money, they scheduled a couple more games, one of which their next was against the Notre Dame All-Stars. And they thought they were actually playing out of a high school stadium and said, you know what, instead of a high school stadium, it'd be better if we played this at a bigger venue. And they said, let's play in Philadelphia.
Yep.
The problem being is that Philadelphia was inside of the territory of the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets.
And so, with this, right, this game actually ended up with Pottsville Maroons winning a rousing game of 9-7. But this is where we get into trouble, or they, I should say, get into trouble. And that is when NFL Commissioner Joseph Carr says that playing in Philadelphia violated the territorial franchise rights to the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets. And thusly, they were suspended as a whole team and could not win the championship.
And that's debated because they say that they were prohibited. Frankfurt claims there was a letter written, like a cease and desist letter, saying you can't play here, and if you play here, you will be suspended. Pottsville claims that they had a verbal agreement from the league in a phone call with no transcript, giving them the right to play in Philadelphia, that it would be okay. Now, with that, it took away their ability. They were scheduled to play the Providence Steamrollers, which they'd already played earlier in the season. Mm-hmm. And during the same time period, Chicago played 2 more contests and won 59-0 and 13-0. But what makes the plot even thicker is the fact that Chicago gets in trouble because Chicago adds these games late in the season, and a lot of these teams would disband. Like you're not making hardly any money. Like it's pro football, but you're not making pro football money.
Yeah. Well, no, it's pro football in the sense that like you're getting paid to play a sport. That's what makes you a professional at it. It doesn't mean you're getting paid a lot, right? It's like when you talk about name origins of teams, right? The Green Bay Packers are named that because of a meat packing industry where they got a bunch of their players, right? So it's like they still worked at the meat packing place and played football.
Yeah. And so the Chicago Cardinals get in trouble because they played the Milwaukee Badgers, which is a pro football team, not the college team. That comes from Wisconsin.
In Madison, but...
Yeah. The Milwaukee team had disbanded, so guys that essentially left for the offseason. And so to fill roster spots, Milwaukee hired 4 high school kids to come play pro football, which violates the NFL's rules. And they were supposed to be sanctioned and have that win taken off of their record, but the league never got around to doing it.
Now, what ends up happening, which is just this is all just mind-boggling, like that all this is going on in one season. But the Cardinals owner is later offered, but he refuses to accept the championship title for his team. At the owners' meeting, he basically just says, we don't deserve it, and take the title over to a team that had beaten them fairly, right? And again, because he looks at it and he says, okay, the Milwaukee and the Hammond game, like those shouldn't be enough to put us over.
Well, and it wasn't the reason they played those games. They played those games to try and show the Bears that they were worth playing because they really wanted to play the Bears to try and make more money in a big game. The equivalent of a derby match in football, like in English football. 2 different clubs from Chicago playing in Chicago. A killing of money. Like that was their motivation for playing the last 2 contests, was not to try and leapfrog the Maroons, but was to entice the Bears into a derby match in Chicago. So yeah, like Chris O'Brien refuses to take the title, and the Cardinal franchise will only start claiming it. I think they start claiming it in 33 when what is it? Is it the Bidwell family buys them, takes over the Cardinal franchise.
The Bidwell family, and they still own it today.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bidwell, I believe, is the owner currently.
Yeah, and so like they claim it in 1933. They start recognizing that they won a championship almost a decade earlier. Um, and mind you, by 1933, the Maroons don't exist anymore
Nope.
because they what happened? What happened? What happened? They left the NFL and went into an independent league, the first American Football League. Um, Yeah, they went into the first American Football League, relocated to Boston, became the Bulldogs, and then eventually folded like just about everybody else in the first American Football League, which was crazy because it had a team, it had an LA Wildcat team that never actually played a single game in LA. All of their games, they were based out of Rock Island, Illinois. And they were called the LA Wildcats because all of their players were recruited from colleges west of the Rockies.
Okay.
Because professional football was very much still East Coast to the Midwest.
Yeah.
And it took a number of years before a franchise would actually play games in LA. Yeah. Even though there was other franchises that would later come out and claim that they were from LA. Anyways, so Pottsville to this day still claims that they're the rightful champions. They made a trophy for themselves. They made a football out of anthracite coal.
Now hold on, we gotta pump the brakes here because there's a reason they made that trophy. So remember, this happens in 1925. Okay, in 1963, the NFL, which now we're in 63, so I think we haven't played a Super Bowl yet, but we're really close because I think the first Super Bowl is in the 60s. But the NFL appoints a special commission to examine the case, but it is voted 12-2 in favor of continuing to recognize the Cardinals as the champions. The lone dissenters are two huge names in football history.
That they are.
Art Rooney, who owns the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I believe the Rooney family still owns them, I think. Yeah, I believe they do.
I think they do.
Yeah, and George Halas, which if you don't know the name George Halas, you probably haven't paid attention to a lot of like football history. But George Halas is the owner of the Chicago Bears and a very prominent name in the NFL. So in response to this, the surviving members of the Pottsville Maroons carve a trophy out of anthracite coal, declaring themselves the champion. And then the best part is they give it to the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 1964 and say, please put this up. And it is on display at the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
It came up again in 2003. And I believe the vote was 30-2, and I think it was the Steelers and the Eagles.
Yep.
Which is somewhat ironic because the Eagles aren't direct descendants of the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets. The Frankfurt Yellow Jackets ceased to operate, and then the next franchise that replaced that market was the Philadelphia Eagles. And that's why the Eagles wear the blue and yellow uniforms, because they took the colors that were already with the market. And the reason that they chose those colors is that blue and yellow are on the flag of Philadelphia, which were inspired by the flag of Sweden, because there's a large Swedish population in Philadelphia, which is why the Eagles wear those really ugly throwbacks that are blue and yellow. So even in the 2003 debate, George Bush even wrote and like gave his opinion saying that he thinks that the Maroons should be the rightful champions. That's awesome. It's just one of these things, like it's crazy because it was in such a time where like teams were there one year, gone the next.
Yeah.
Like 20 teams in 2025 or 1925. And then I think by like the mid 30s, the league shrinks down to 8.
Yeah.
It's the smallest the NFL ever gets. Mm-hmm. And then it rebounds from there. it's just kind of crazy to me that, like, you know, they didn't start playing a championship game, I think, until 33. So anytime before 33, the champion is determined by best. Like, it's like soccer. It's like who wins who wins the league table, right? You have the best record on the table. And ties were a thing.
Yeah. Because the Cardinals are, I believe, 11-2-1 in their final, like, counting the two games. They finished that season 11-2-1. So again, they're trying to play the Bears, but if they eliminate those, if they really don't count those last two games, they're 9-2-1, and the Maroons, before they get the boot, are 10-2. So it was such a cool story. Like, I'd never heard of anything like this.
Well, and it's when you're competing against the major media, like, you know what I mean, of like a modern day franchise like the Arizona Cardinals, right? Who have this history that continues, and they claim that there's a curse, and that's why they haven't played really well until, you know, just very recently when they made the playoffs and were successful for a minute.
Yeah, it was back in 2015, 16, I think, when it was Carson Palmer was playing quarterback. So Larry Fitzgerald and everything like that. So
yeah, I watched a little bit that came from the NFL Network, and they said that, like, the people in Pottsville say that they get calls from people from Arizona like all the time saying, please stop the curse, and they're like, no,
we will when you give us the trophy.
I also thought it was kind of fitting that, you know, Pottsville is like a naughty kid at Christmas, and they got a lump of coal.
Yeah, because they really
instead of a championship, you get a lump of coal.
Get a lump of coal.
It led me to watch a bunch of different things about the history of the NFL and the movement of franchises, and just seeing how many franchises have, like, the Rams and the Cardinals have moved around a ton.
Yep.
And just different ones, like it just led to a bunch of different, like, interesting stories. Like the Steelers, the reason that they only have logos on one side of their helmet is that they wanted to try the logo out. So the Rooney said, put it on one side and we'll test it out.
Yeah.
And then, like, they went to a Super Bowl, who says, okay, never change it.
Right, yeah, never change it. Well,
so, like,
go.
But, like, that's why they're the only one with a one-sided logo. And then the Browns have never had a logo on their helmet in a real game. In a preseason, they tried once, and then the players hated it so much they were, like, ripping them off before the game was over because they got smoked because they're the Browns. But it's really interesting to me, especially when there's a lot of conversation, especially about, like, our beloved Seahawks keeping their 90s or 80s throwbacks as they're going back to those, reverting back to those as their every week uniforms.
Yeah, well, and it's cool, like, because they have that, and then I was gonna say the one thing that Mike Clay said on the podcast was in a roundabout way, so not a direct. There's no direct transition. It's kind of like what we said with the the Yellow Jackets, right? Like, where the Yellow Jackets go bankrupt and the Eagles replace them. But there's, like, a roundabout way. If you were going to try and tie Pottsville to a current team, the current team that he said was the Washington Commanders. And he said it's a roundabout way. It's not a direct link. You can't, like, draw an arrow, you know, for it, but it's like just where it came from. So
yeah, it's because the Maroons move to Boston, become the Bulldogs. The Bulldogs cease operating, go under. There's no franchise in Boston. And then the next franchise that comes in is the Boston Braves.
Yep.
And then the Boston Brave franchise will eventually move to Washington to become the Redskins, and then eventually the football team and the Commanders. Yeah. But the ironic thing is that Pottsville has the same color scheme.
Yeah.
It's maroon and gold.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, again, it's one of those interesting things. And then you have, like, the weird things where, like, the Houston moved to Tennessee, and now there's Houston Texans, but the Tennessee franchise still wears they're really the Houston Oilers.
Yep, they have the right. And there was something They told the Texans they're not allowed to wear it. Like they own that right to wear that uniform, and I was like, wow. I was like, I mean, I get it. It's your franchise history, but they're the ones in Houston. You left. So
a similar thing happened with Baltimore. When Baltimore brought a franchise back to Baltimore, they go, well, we should be the Colts. This is where the Colts came from. And Indianapolis was like, no, we own the trademark. This is our team now.
Yeah.
Make something new. And then they went with a deranged poet instead.
Well, it works really well. Like, I mean, you got to.
It does. I love the
go stuff. Like Seahawk works for us because we have ospreys that fly everywhere, right? But like, explain to me, right, why we have the Vikings in Minnesota, right? And I'd say Scandinavian population, right, from timber days. Packers, we know why. Bears, don't know a lot of Bears in Illinois.
It's because they chose the Bears because the baseball team was the Cubs, and football players are bigger and stronger than baseball players, so they chose the Bears. Okay. But it's really interesting. Like this is a whole nother podcast.
This is probably another podcast.
But like the other thing I thought about was the prevalence of teams that are either the Maroons, the Cincinnati Reds, the Boston Red Sox. Like red is a very prevalent color in sports because it's one of the cheapest uniforms to make. And ironically, somebody said the reason that the Cardinals in Chicago and now Arizona are the Cardinals is they bought old uniforms off the Maroons and they'd faded. And somebody said, hey, aren't those maroon? And somebody said, no, they're cardinal.
Ha! That'd be good.
Right? But like, think about it. Like you have like the Stanford Cardinal, Alabama Crimson Tide. And I got into it. I was sitting at basketball practice.
You went down a rabbit hole.
Practicing. And went down a rabbit hole. And I was like, dude, uniforms. Like the NFL didn't have a white, like, because in almost every sport now there's a rule that says like the home team wears either the color or the white uniform.
Right.
Like one team has to wear a color uniform, the other one wears white. Unless it's baseball, because baseball's boring and that's why it's white versus gray and nobody watches. Figure it out.
But like, yeah, the home team just gets to dictate what they want to wear, and then you wear, because like Miami's strategy is they wear white at home, right? Because it's so dang hot. So.
But like they were saying, it was tough. The NCAA college football actually solved the problem of what FIFA calls kit.
Yeah, they're kits.
Kit clash.
Yeah.
They passed an ordinance like in like the 40s or I think in the 40s, and then like the NFL doesn't do it until like the 60s, where it becomes white and a color, because people used to wear color and color, and then it was like, well, you have to wear a light color, and they have to wear a dark color. Because you'd have teams like, you'd have the Army-Navy game where Navy's wearing black, or Army's wearing black and Navy's wearing navy blue.
Yeah.
And when you're covered in mud, you can't really tell the difference.
Yeah.
The last rabbit hole that it made me think of is, because Michigan's in the playoff and I hate because I hate Tom Brady too. See the connection?
You hate Tom Brady, and I don't know why. Like hate is such a strong word, guys. I want to lay this out for you really quick. We played fantasy football, again, tying it all back together, where we did a coaches league. So we had I think we had 8 coaches, I think, and I kid you not, guys. Barker drafted Tom Brady so that he could make sure that Tom Brady didn't score a single point in fantasy football, a relevant point. He sat on Barker's bench the entire season, and people sent him trades to try and get Tom Brady, and Barker would not trade him because he does not like Tom Brady.
Name of my team that year was No Brady Gonna Hurt Me.
Yes, and it's so true, because Brady's not.
Everybody always looks at the Michigan helmet,
right,
with that beautiful winged stripe. I will give them clout for that. They have a great football helmet. And I was looking at like, there's got to be, is it like the face of a Wolverine? Because a Wolverine kind of has that pointy face. And a lot of people will say that, like, it kind of like maybe it's.
No, I know exactly what you mean. Like, I know
it's. Yeah. So I looked it up, and Herbert Fritz Chrysler came to Michigan in like the late 30s and brought the helmet idea. He'd already been using it at Princeton.
Oh, okay.
And his methodology behind it was it made it easier to see who was your receiver and who wasn't.
because you could look and
the structure of the leather helmet had a wing on it, and so they just painted that other piece of leather. So it's really just like a happy accident of the construction of a helmet. But they weren't the first to do it. Actually, Ohio State did it, and then Michigan State did it.
But Ohio State doesn't. Did they paint the wing still, or did they?
They did it with it was the leather helmet days.
Okay.
So they just did it.
They just did something.
Spalding started selling a helmet that had a piece of leather that was winged on the front.
Okay.
And so they just started when Michigan did it, they painted the wing and one stripe, I think, from what the pictures show. But anyway, it was just really interesting to me. Where does this come from? Where does this, I mean, it's football history, and it really was a matter of it made it easier to see their receivers and figure out when you're looking downfield, the same reason. I was watching something else and said the Buffalo Bills for a while wore red helmets because everybody else in the NFC or the AFC AFC East had a white helmet.
So you could immediately.
So they were the only team that wore red helmets, so you could see who your receivers were easier.
Smart.
Right? It's come down to just really simple stuff.
Hashtag big brain.
And in this era of market research, it really just puzzles me that this guy literally said, we're going to start a pro football team. And they said, what colors? And he said, I don't know. Just send me something.
You just buy a maroon. Whatever.
You can ask my wife. We ordered new jerseys for Ari Long this year, and I invested probably way too many man hours into designing copious amounts of uniforms I did not order.
Yeah.
And went with a very traditional uniform. Because I think we're kind of in that backswing where less is more. So I mean, we're not quite the Maroons, but
you look good. The uniforms are sweet. They're slick.
They're clean.
So,
but anyway, we're gonna put this out there, and we did not make the goal of being short this week. I told you I had rabbit holes.
No, we were good. We were when we wrapped up the Maroon part, we were at probably 23 minutes, and then we went down the rabbit holes, which is fine because look, if people want to stay on for the rabbit hole, they can. So we all know they stay on for the sign off because it's just classic. We just have classic opener and classic closer. So it's cool.
Behave yourselves.
Yeah.
Stick inside of your franchise territories.
Yeah.
So that Santa Claus will be kind to you and bring you a present.
Yeah.
And unlike the Pottsville Maroons, you will not get a lump of coal.
Giant lump of coal. So be on the lookout. Might be able to squeeze one in next week. Just depends on our schedules and everything like that. But I do have a teaser for possible next episode. So I was driving this today, and I called my mom and I said, Patty Turner's an avid listener to the podcast, which is always been. We already shouted her out, but shout out Patty Turner. And what was really cool was she goes, somebody said something. And I thought that maybe you could talk about it on your podcast. And I said, what is it? And she goes, I don't remember, but I'm going to remember. And I said, so we have a possible teaser from Patty Turner that we could have something really cool to talk about. We just don't know what it is yet. So as always, though, guys, shoot us Instagram, shoot us comments, tell us in class, right? I know more people watch this that are Barker's kids than mine because mine are 8th graders and are too cool for school. But if you have an idea or you want to hear about something, let us know. So, Bark, anything else?
One of my kids said something about the liberation of Hong Kong or something or other. So I'll have to ask for more specificity. Cow. So shout out to 4th period American Studies for listening today. So
thank you. Appreciate it. So guys, until next time, I'm going to be the Turn.
I'm the Bark.
And we're going to be here a long time. Have a good night, everybody.
Be safe.
And you know what? Be well.